The ransom call came at exactly 3:47 a.m., shattering the silence of the Blackwood mansion like a gunshot through crystal. Margaret Blackwood jolted awake in her silk-sheeted bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as the encrypted phone on her nightstand buzzed with an urgency that could only mean one thing. Her worst nightmare had finally materialized. "We have your son," the electronically distorted voice crackled through the speaker, each word deliberate and chilling. 24 hours. $50 million. No police. No FBI. One chance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The line went dead, leaving Margaret staring at the dark ceiling of her Beverly Hills estate, her mind reeling with terror and disbelief. Alexander Blackwood, her 26-year-old son and heir to the Blackwood Industries empire, had vanished without a trace during what should have been a routine business trip to negotiate mining contracts in South America. The private jet had landed safely in Bogotá 3 days ago. Security footage confirmed he'd left the airport, and then nothing. Complete radio silence until this moment. Margaret's fingers trembled as she speed-dialed her head of security, Marcus Chen, a former Navy SEAL whose military precision had kept the Blackwood family safe for the past 8 years. He answered on the first ring, already alert despite the ungodly hour. "They have Alex," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. 50 million. 24 hours. Marcus was moving before she finished speaking, his tactical boots already pounding across the hardwood floors of his quarters in the estate's security wing. "I'm activating Protocol 7. Nobody in or out without my clearance. Have you contacted the authorities?" "They said no police," Margaret replied, wrapping her silk robe tighter around her trembling frame. "Marcus, if something happens to my boy—" Her voice broke, years of corporate steel crumbling under the weight of maternal terror. "Nothing's going to happen to Alex," Marcus assured her with the calm certainty that had made him legendary in special operations. "But we need to move fast and smart. I'm calling in favors from people who don't officially exist." Within 30 minutes, the Blackwood mansion had transformed into a crisis command center. The mahogany-paneled library, usually reserved for Margaret's rare book collection and quiet contemplation, now bristled with encrypted communication equipment, satellite phones, and multiple computer screens displaying real-time intelligence feeds from across South America. Marcus had assembled a team of specialists, each more formidable than the last, their faces grim with professional focus. The kidnapping had been expertly executed. Alexander's security detail, 2 highly trained former military contractors, had been found drugged but alive in a Bogotá hotel room, their memories of the past 18 hours completely erased by sophisticated pharmaceutical intervention. The rental car Alex had been using was discovered abandoned in a favela 40 miles outside the city, its GPS tracker ripped out, surveillance cameras in the area mysteriously malfunctioned. Whoever had taken him possessed resources, intelligence, and a level of planning that spoke to either government involvement or a criminal organization with serious backing. The voice on the call was filtered through military-grade scramblers, reported Sarah Kim, Marcus's cybersecurity specialist, her fingers flying across 3 keyboards simultaneously. "But I'm running frequency analysis, looking for baseline vocal patterns. If we can get another recording, I might be able to break through the distortion." Margaret paced the Persian rug like a caged lioness, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled from hours of stress. At 52, she had built Blackwood Industries from her father's modest construction company into a multinational conglomerate worth $12 billion. She had faced down hostile takeovers, navigated international crises, and dominated boardrooms filled with men who underestimated her at their peril. But this was different. This was her child, her only child, the center of her universe since her husband's death in a climbing accident 5 years earlier. "Ma'am," Marcus said gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You need to stay focused. Alex is smart, he's resourceful, and he's been trained for this exact scenario since he was 16. Remember the survival courses, the kidnapping simulations we ran? He knows how to stay alive and buy us time." Margaret nodded, drawing strength from Marcus's unwavering confidence. Alexander had indeed been prepared for this possibility from a young age. The Blackwood fortune made the family perpetual targets, and she had insisted on extensive security training for her son. But knowing he was prepared and actually facing the reality of his abduction were entirely different experiences. The second call came 18 hours later, just as the California sun was beginning its descent toward the Pacific horizon. This time, they were ready. Sarah's equipment captured every electronic signature, while Marcus traced the signal through a maze of international relay stations. The voice was the same, mechanically altered and coldly professional. The money. Small bills, unmarked, in waterproof cases. GPS coordinates will be transmitted in 1 hour. One person comes alone. Any deviation means your son dies. I want proof of life, Margaret demanded, her voice steadier now despite the ice in her veins. I want to hear Alexander's voice, or there's no deal. Static filled the line for several agonizing seconds. Then, barely audible through layers of electronic distortion, came her son's voice. Mom, I'm okay. Don't give them anything. I'm in a place with stone walls and... The transmission cut abruptly, replaced by the kidnapper's mechanical tone. 6 hours. Coordinates incoming. Come alone. Margaret's knees nearly buckled with relief at hearing Alex's voice, but his message chilled her. He was trying to give them intelligence, clues about his location, even while captive. Stone walls suggested old construction, possibly colonial architecture common throughout certain regions of Colombia. It wasn't much, but it was something. We traced the coordinates, set up overwatch positions, and extract him during the exchange, Marcus said, already coordinating with his team. Standard kidnapping protocols. No, Margaret said firmly, surprising everyone in the room. We do exactly what they want. We pay the ransom. Marcus stared at her as if she'd suggested surrendering to enemy forces. Ma'am, with respect, paying never guarantees safe return. These people are professionals. The moment they have the money, Alex becomes a liability. Then we make sure the exchange goes perfectly, Margaret replied, her CEO instincts taking over despite her emotional turmoil. $50 million is pocket change compared to losing my son. We pay. We get him back, and then we hunt down every single person involved. The GPS coordinates led to a remote stretch of the Colombian jungle, 3 hours by helicopter from Bogotá. Satellite imagery revealed an abandoned mining complex, its concrete structures half swallowed by decades of tropical vegetation. The nearest town was 40 miles away, accessible only by a single dirt road that would take hours to traverse. It was the perfect location for a clandestine exchange, isolated enough to prevent law enforcement intervention, but with multiple escape routes through the dense jungle canopy. Margaret insisted on making the exchange herself, despite Marcus's strenuous objections and the pleading of her board of directors, who had been hastily briefed on the crisis. As the controlling shareholder and CEO of Blackwood Industries, her death or disappearance would trigger a corporate catastrophe affecting thousands of employees and billions in market capitalization. But she refused to send anyone else into danger on her behalf. Alex is my son, she stated with finality. I'm not delegating this to hired help, no matter how skilled they are. The helicopter touched down in a jungle clearing at exactly sunset, its rotors whipping the tropical air into a frenzied cyclone of leaves and debris. Margaret emerged carrying 2 reinforced aluminum cases, each containing $25 million in unmarked bills, their weight almost too much for her to manage alone. The humidity hit her like a physical blow, and within seconds her designer clothes were soaked with perspiration. The abandoned mining complex loomed before her, like something from a fever dream, its brutalist concrete structures stained with decades of rain and jungle rot. Rusted equipment lay scattered throughout the compound, slowly being reclaimed by vines and exotic flowering plants that seemed to glow in the fading light. The air thrummed with the sounds of unseen creatures, a symphony of chirps, calls, and rustling that spoke of life teeming in every shadow. Senora Blackwood, a voice called from the shadows of the main building, speaking accented English with careful pronunciation. You came alone. This is good. 3 figures emerged from different directions, their faces concealed by tactical masks, assault rifles held with professional competence. Margaret's security training kicked in automatically, cataloging details that might be useful later. The leader was approximately 6 feet tall, moved with military bearing, wore expensive boots that suggested financial resources beyond typical criminal enterprises. The other two flanked her escape route, their positioning textbook perfect for a hostage exchange. "Where is my son?" Margaret demanded, setting down the cases but keeping her hands visible. "I want to see Alexander before we proceed." The leader gestured toward a side building, and a fourth figure appeared, pushing Alexander Blackwood into the fading daylight. Margaret's heart clenched at the sight of her son. He was alive, apparently unharmed, but thinner than when she'd last seen him. His expensive suit was torn and dirty, his usually perfectly styled hair disheveled, but his eyes burned with the same fierce intelligence that had made him her pride and joy. "Mom," Alex called out, his voice steady despite his circumstances. "I'm okay. These people, they're not what they seem. Listen carefully to what they're saying." One of the guards silenced him with a sharp command in rapid Spanish, the words too quick and colloquial for Margaret's limited knowledge of the language to follow, but something in Alex's message nagged at her. Not what they seem. Listen carefully. Was he trying to tell her something specific about their captors? "The money," the leader said, his English precise but heavily accented. "Open the cases. Show me." Margaret complied, kneeling to flip the latches on both aluminum cases. Neat stacks of $100 bills filled each container, exactly as specified. The leader approached cautiously, kneeling to examine the currency while keeping his weapon trained on her. As he inspected the ransom, he spoke briefly to his companions in Spanish, his voice carrying the rapid cadence of someone giving detailed instructions. Margaret caught fragments, enough to recognize numbers and references to time, but not enough to understand the content. The other kidnappers responded with what sounded like questions or concerns, their tone suggesting disagreement or uncertainty about something. "Everything appears correct," the leader finally announced, snapping the cases closed. "Your son will be released at the road junction 2 kilometers north of here in exactly 30 minutes. This gives us time to disappear before you can summon help." "No," Margaret said firmly. "We exchange simultaneously, or there's no deal. I'm not leaving without Alexander." The leader's posture shifted subtly, his grip tightening on his weapon. For a moment, Margaret thought she might have pushed too hard, demanded too much from people who held all the cards. Then he laughed, a sound that seemed genuinely amused rather than threatening. "You are brave, Senora Blackwood. Very brave. Perhaps too brave for your own good. But we are professionals, not murderers. Your son has been treated well, fed properly, given medical attention for a small cut on his hand. We want only money, not blood." As if on cue, the sound of approaching helicopter rotors echoed through the jungle canopy, growing louder by the second. Margaret's heart sank, realizing that Marcus had disobeyed her direct orders and was mounting a rescue operation. The kidnappers immediately shifted into combat positions, their weapons swinging toward the sound of approaching aircraft. "You betrayed us," the leader snarled, his previous calm evaporating into deadly anger. "We said come alone." "I did come alone," Margaret protested desperately. "I don't know who that is. Please, just take the money and let my son go." The helicopter was almost overhead now, its searchlight beginning to probe the jungle canopy. The kidnappers were shouting at each other in rapid Spanish, their voices tight with panic and rage. Margaret could see her carefully planned exchange dissolving into chaos, exactly the scenario she had feared most. Then, from the mansion's service entrance, emerged the most unlikely figure imaginable. Isabella Santos had been cleaning the Blackwood estate for 3 years, arriving each morning at dawn to maintain the sprawling property with quiet efficiency. She was 34 years old, small in stature but possessed of endless energy, with calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work and dark eyes that missed nothing despite her habit of keeping them downcast in the presence of the family. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Margaret knew almost nothing about her beyond her first name, and the fact that she was punctual, thorough, and invisible in the way that domestic staff often became to their wealthy employers. But Isabella wasn't supposed to be here. The entire estate had been locked down, all non-essential personnel dismissed until the crisis was resolved. Yet here she stood, still wearing her simple gray uniform, looking impossibly small and out of place among the high-tech security equipment and grim-faced specialists who had turned the mansion into a war room. "Excuse me, Mrs. Blackwood," Isabella said softly, her accented English careful and respectful. "I heard what happened. I know I shouldn't be here, but I think maybe I can help." Marcus spun around, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm before recognizing the housekeeper. "Isabella, you need to leave immediately. This is a secure area. How did you even get past the perimeter?" "I clean here every day for 3 years," she replied with a slight smile. "I know every door, every window, every way in and out. But that's not important now. What's important is that I heard the recording of the kidnappers talking." Margaret looked up from the communication equipment, where she had been monitoring radio chatter from the jungle operation. "What about it?" Isabella's expression grew serious, her usual deference replaced by focused intensity. "Mrs. Blackwood, I don't think your son is in Colombia. The men who took him, the way they speak Spanish, it's not Colombian. It's not even South American." The room fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant sound of helicopter rotors on the radio. Marcus stepped closer, his skepticism evident, but his professional instincts engaged. "What do you mean?" "The kidnapping happened in Bogotá. All the evidence points to Colombian criminals." "The evidence points to where they want you to look," Isabella said quietly. "But when people speak their native language, especially when they're stressed or giving orders, they can't hide their regional accent, their local expressions. The man giving orders, he's Mexican. Specifically, he's from Sinaloa State. The others, they're following his lead, but their Spanish is different too. One sounds like he might be from Guatemala, another from El Salvador." Margaret stared at the housekeeper as if seeing her for the first time. How could you possibly know all that from a few seconds of distorted audio? Isabella's cheeks flushed slightly, but she maintained eye contact. "Before I came to America, I worked for an international shipping company in Mexico City. We dealt with clients from all over Latin America. You learn to recognize where people are from by how they speak, especially in business where it matters for negotiations and contracts." Sarah looked up from her computer banks. "If she's right, it would explain why our satellite surveillance of Colombia hasn't picked up anything useful. We've been looking in the wrong country entirely." Marcus was already moving, his tactical mind processing the implications. "Isabella, can you listen to the recording again? Can you tell us anything else about where these men might be from, or where they might have taken Alex?" Isabella nodded, her confidence growing as she realized the security team was taking her seriously. "Yes, but I need to hear more than just the ransom demands. Do you have any other recordings? Anything longer?" "We have the entire exchange from the jungle," Marcus said, pulling up audio files on his secure laptop. "But it's mostly in Spanish, and our translator hasn't arrived yet." "I don't need a translator," Isabella said quietly. "Spanish is my first language." As the audio played, Isabella's expression grew increasingly troubled. She listened intently to voices that had been dismissed by the security team as background chatter, her eyes closing in concentration as she parsed accents, colloquialisms, and regional speech patterns that revealed far more than anyone had realized. "This is very bad," she whispered when the recording ended. "Very, very bad." Margaret felt her blood turn to ice. "What do you mean?" Isabella looked around the room at the assembled security specialists, her usual shyness replaced by grim determination. "The men who have your son, they're not just kidnappers. They're talking about moving him again, tonight. They mentioned something about El Patron being unhappy with how long this is taking. And Mrs. Blackwood, when they say patron, they don't mean boss. They mean cartel leader. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. This wasn't a simple kidnapping for ransom. This was something far more dangerous, involving organizations with resources that dwarfed most national governments, people for whom $50 million was pocket change, and human life was utterly disposable. "Where?" Marcus demanded. "If they're moving him, where are they taking him?" Isabella's face was pale, but her voice remained steady. "They mention a safe house near Tijuana, close to the border, but that's not the worst part. They're talking about a timeline, something about 48 hours before they have to, quote, clean up loose ends. In cartel speak, that means." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood perfectly. Alexander Blackwood wasn't just a kidnapping victim anymore. He was a witness to cartel operations, a liability that would need to be eliminated regardless of whether the ransom was paid. Margaret sank into a leather chair, the full weight of the situation crushing down on her. All their careful planning, all their resources and expertise had been focused on the wrong country, chasing shadows while her son was moved deeper into a criminal network that specialized in making people disappear forever. "We have to get him back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We have to find him before." She couldn't bring herself to voice the alternative. Isabella stepped forward, her small frame somehow radiating strength and determination. "Mrs. Blackwood, I know this is asking a lot, but I think I can help you find your son. I know how these people think, how they operate. I know the language, not just the words but the culture, the code they use when they don't want outsiders to understand." Marcus studied the housekeeper with new respect. "Isabella, this isn't cleaning bathrooms and dusting furniture. These are some of the most dangerous criminals in the world. If we're wrong, if we walk into a cartel stronghold unprepared, we don't come back. If you do nothing, Mr. Alexander doesn't come back either," Isabella replied simply. "And I'm not just a housekeeper, Mr. Chen. I used to be other things before I came here. Before I decided that invisible was safer than visible." Margaret looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Isabella hesitated, clearly wrestling with how much to reveal. "I worked for the shipping company, yes. But not in the office. I was a liaison with difficult clients. People who shipped things that weren't always legal, to places that weren't always safe. I learned to speak their language, to understand their world, because my life depended on it." The room was absolutely silent as the implications sank in. The quiet, unassuming woman who had been invisible in their lives for 3 years was offering to guide them into the heart of one of the most dangerous criminal networks on Earth. "Why?" Margaret asked softly. "Why would you risk your life for us?" Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Because 3 years ago I came to this country with nothing. No money, no connections, no legal status. I was desperate, scared, sleeping in my car. You gave me a job without asking questions. You paid me fairly. You treated me with respect, when other employers treated people like me as disposable. Your son, he always says good morning when he sees me, asks about my family, remembers my daughter's birthday. Most rich people, they look through us like we're ghosts. You never did." Margaret felt tears streaming down her own cheeks. In her desperation to save Alexander, she had forgotten the network of people whose lives touched theirs every day. Isabella wasn't just offering professional expertise. She was offering loyalty earned through years of simple human decency. "What do you need?" Margaret asked, her voice thick with emotion. Isabella wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. "I need to get to Mexico, tonight if possible. I need to make some calls to people I haven't talked to in a long time, people who might be able to help, but who will only trust me if I can prove I'm still connected to that world." Marcus was already pulling up maps on his computer. "We can have you in Tijuana in 6 hours. Private jet, no customs delays, full security escort." "No security escort," Isabella said firmly. "If I show up with armed Americans, everyone will assume I'm working for law enforcement. I have to go alone, or I might as well not go at all." Margaret stood up, her maternal instincts warring with her business acumen. Sending Isabella alone into cartel territory felt like trading one life for another, a bargain that violated everything she believed about protecting the people under her care. "I can't ask you to do this," she said finally. "The risk is too great." Isabella smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. "Mrs. Blackwood, you're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference." She paused, looking around the room at the assembled security specialists with their high-tech equipment and military bearing. "Besides, sometimes the best way to hide is in plain sight. Sometimes being invisible is the greatest advantage of all." As if to emphasize her point, she reached into her cleaning cart and pulled out a battered cell phone, its case held together with electrical tape. "This phone has numbers that your government would pay millions to see. People who move things across borders, people who know which officials can be bought, people who hear things that never make it into intelligence reports." She looked directly at Margaret. "Give me 12 hours. If I can't find your son in 12 hours, then we try it your way, with helicopters and assault teams and all the technology money can buy. But let me try first. Let me use the skills that kept me alive in a world where women like me usually disappear without a trace. Margaret found herself nodding before her rational mind could object. There was something about Isabella's quiet confidence, her intimate knowledge of a world that existed in the shadows of legitimate society, that offered hope where military precision had failed. 12 hours, she agreed. But Isabella, if this goes wrong, if something happens to you, I'll never forgive myself. Isabella was already moving toward the door, her demeanor shifting subtly as she prepared to step back into a life she had left behind. Mrs. Blackwood, forgiveness is a luxury we can worry about after we bring your son home. As the housekeeper disappeared into the California night, Margaret realized that everything she thought she knew about the people in her life was about to be challenged. The invisible woman who had cleaned her home for 3 years was about to become the most important person in her world, carrying the fate of her only child into the dangerous shadows of international crime. The next 12 hours would determine whether quiet competence and cultural knowledge could succeed, where military might and corporate resources had failed. Margaret could only pray that she had made the right choice in trusting her son's life to a woman whose greatest qualification was that she had learned to survive in a world where survival was never guaranteed. The Gulfstream G650 touched down at Tijuana International Airport at 3:17 a.m., its engines whining to a stop on the private aviation tarmac. Isabella Santos emerged from the aircraft wearing clothes that Margaret had never seen before, her usual gray uniform replaced by worn jeans, a faded denim jacket, and scuffed boots that looked like they had walked through decades of hard living. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried a single duffel bag that seemed to contain everything she needed for what might be the most dangerous mission of her life. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the quiet, deferential housekeeper who moved through the Blackwood mansion like a whisper. In her place stood a woman who belonged to the shadows, someone who could blend into the dangerous underworld of border towns and criminal enterprises without attracting unwanted attention. Her posture had changed, her movements more confident and street-smart, her eyes constantly scanning for threats that came naturally to someone who had survived in places where survival was never guaranteed. Margaret watched through the aircraft's window as Isabella walked across the tarmac toward a waiting taxi, her heart clenching with worry and guilt. Sending the housekeeper into cartel territory felt like the worst kind of betrayal, asking someone to risk everything for a family that had barely acknowledged her existence until crisis struck. But Isabella had insisted, and deep down Margaret knew that conventional approaches had already failed. Sometimes desperate situations required desperate measures. Isabella's first stop was a 24-hour internet cafe in downtown Tijuana, a grimy establishment that catered to migrant workers sending money home and individuals who needed to communicate without leaving digital footprints. The clientele was exactly what she had expected: tired men in work clothes, nervous women clutching Western Union receipts, and a few customers whose careful anonymity suggested they were conducting business that wouldn't bear official scrutiny. She purchased 2 hours of computer time and settled into a corner terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed encrypted messaging services that existed in the gray areas between legal and illegal communication. The contacts in her phone represented years of careful relationship building, people who moved money, information, and occasionally human beings across borders that existed more on maps than in the practical realities of international commerce. Her first message went to Carlos Mendoza, a freight coordinator who specialized in expedited shipping between Mexico and the United States. Carlos had always maintained that his business was completely legitimate, but Isabella knew that legitimate freight companies didn't operate exclusively at night or require payments in cash delivered to specific locations at predetermined times. More importantly, Carlos heard everything that moved through the Tijuana corridor, and he owed Isabella several significant favors from their past professional relationship. The response came within minutes, a brief acknowledgement followed by a phone number and instructions to call from a specific payphone 3 blocks from the cafe. Isabella deleted the digital conversation, paid for her computer time, and walked through the pre-dawn streets of Tijuana toward what she hoped would be the first link in a chain leading to Alexander Blackwood. The payphone was exactly where Carlos had indicated, mounted on the wall of a closed auto repair shop whose security cameras had been carefully spray-painted over. Isabella dialed the number, feeding coins into the slot while watching the street for signs of surveillance or unwanted attention. "Isabella Santos," Carlos said without preamble when the call connected. "I heard you were dead. There were stories about what happened to you after you disappeared from Mexico City." "I'm very much alive," Isabella replied in rapid Spanish, her voice carrying undertones of authority that surprised even her. "And I need information about some people who shouldn't be in your territory." Carlos chuckled, a sound that held no humor. "My territory? You give me too much credit, pequeña. I just move boxes from point A to point B. I don't ask questions about what's in the boxes or who owns them." "These people took someone who doesn't belong to them," Isabella continued, ignoring his deflection. "Someone important to people who have the resources to make life very difficult for anyone who gets in their way. I need to know where they are, and I need to know tonight." The line was silent for several seconds, and Isabella could almost hear Carlos weighing the potential risks and benefits of getting involved. Finally, he spoke, his voice more serious than before. "There are rumors about some Sinaloa people who moved through here 2 days ago. Expensive cars, serious security, very quiet about their business. They rented a warehouse in the industrial district, paid cash for 2 weeks, no questions asked." Isabella felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of warehouse?" "Storage facility for electronics importers. Legitimate business, but the owner isn't particular about paperwork as long as the rent is paid in advance. The location is isolated, good security, multiple escape routes. Perfect for people who need privacy for their operations." "Carlos, I need an address, and I need it to be accurate, because if I walk into the wrong place, people are going to die." Another pause, longer this time. "Isabella, whatever you're involved in, it's bigger than you think. The people who rented that warehouse, they're not local criminals. They're connected to operations that reach all the way to Culiacan. If you're planning what I think you're planning, you need serious backup." "I have backup," Isabella lied smoothly, "but I need the location first." Carlos provided an address in the Otay Industrial District, along with detailed descriptions of the facility layout and security measures. He also gave her the name of the warehouse owner, a man named Esteban Ruiz, who might be willing to provide additional information for the right price. By the time the call ended, Isabella had a clear picture of where Alexander Blackwood was likely being held and a plan for confirming his presence without alerting his captors. The taxi ride to the industrial district took 40 minutes through streets that grew progressively more deserted as they moved away from the city center. Isabella used the time to review everything she remembered about cartel operating procedures, the protocols and security measures that would govern a high-value kidnapping operation. The kidnappers would be professional, well-armed, and paranoid about law enforcement interference. They would have established escape routes, communication protocols, and contingency plans for various scenarios, including rescue attempts. But they would also be overconfident, convinced that their reputation and firepower made them untouchable by anyone foolish enough to challenge them. That overconfidence might create opportunities for someone who understood their methods and could exploit their assumptions about potential threats. The warehouse district was exactly what Isabella had expected, a maze of concrete buildings and chain-link fences designed for functionality rather than aesthetics. Security lighting created pools of harsh illumination separated by deep shadows, and the few visible workers moved with the efficient purpose of people trying to complete their tasks and get home as quickly as possible. Isabella paid the taxi driver and walked the final 6 blocks to the target location, using the time to study the facility and identify potential surveillance positions. The warehouse was larger than she had anticipated, a sprawling complex with multiple loading docks and what appeared to be office space on the second floor. 3 expensive SUVs were parked near the main entrance, their tinted windows and aftermarket modifications suggesting they belonged to people who valued both comfort and security. She found Esteban Ruiz exactly where Carlos had predicted, sitting in the security office of an adjacent warehouse, monitoring closed-circuit television feeds from throughout the industrial complex. Ruiz was a thin man in his 60s, with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades navigating the gray areas between legal and illegal commerce. His office smelled of cigarettes and instant coffee, and the walls were covered with security certificates and photographs of him shaking hands with various local officials. "You're the woman Carlos told me about," Ruiz said without looking up from his monitors. "You want to know about the people in Building 7. Isabella placed $500 in cash on his desk, enough money to ensure his cooperation, but not so much as to suggest she was law enforcement or representing some rival criminal organization. I want to know how many people are inside, how they're armed, and whether they have anyone with them who doesn't belong. Ruiz pocketed the money and pulled up specific camera feeds on his monitor. 6 men total. 4 at any given time in the main warehouse space, 2 in the office area upstairs. They have assault rifles, body armor, military communications equipment. Professional grade everything. He switched to a different camera angle. And yes, they have someone with them who definitely doesn't belong. Young man, well-dressed, despite the circumstances. Keeps trying to talk to them even though they've told him to stay quiet. He's not restrained, but he's clearly not free to leave. Isabella studied the grainy black and white images, her heart pounding as she recognized Alexander Blackwood even through the poor quality surveillance footage. He was alive, apparently unharmed, and being held in a location that was defensible but not impregnable. The kidnappers were confident enough in their security to allow him some freedom of movement, which suggested they didn't consider him an immediate flight risk. "How long have they been here?" she asked. 36 hours. They paid for 2 weeks, but they've been making phone calls about moving operations somewhere else. My guess is they won't be here much longer. Isabella felt the pressure of limited time pressing down on her. If the kidnappers moved Alexander to a more secure location, possibly across the border into the United States or deeper into cartel-controlled territory in Mexico, any chance of rescue would disappear completely. "Esteban, I need a favor. A big favor that's going to require you to look the other way for the next few hours." Ruiz studied her carefully, clearly weighing the potential consequences of deeper involvement. "What kind of favor?" "I need access to your security system. I need to be able to monitor their movements and communications. And I need you to have a convenient power failure in exactly 2 hours that will disable the external lighting around Building 7 for approximately 15 minutes. The warehouse owner laughed, but the sound held no amusement. "Lady, you're talking about going up against 6 armed professionals who work for people that make my life very short if they think I've betrayed them. $500 doesn't buy that kind of risk." Isabella placed another $1,000 on the desk, followed by a business card for Blackwood Industries that she had taken from Margaret's office. "The people I represent have resources that make your cartel friends look like corner drug dealers. Help me tonight, and you'll have protection that reaches all the way to Washington, D.C. Refuse. And you might find yourself dealing with federal investigations into every business transaction you've conducted for the past 10 years. Ruiz stared at the business card, clearly recognizing the Blackwood name, and understanding the implications of corporate power that operated on a completely different level than street-level criminal enterprises. After several minutes of consideration, he nodded slowly. 2 hours. 15 minutes of darkness. After that, I don't know you, I never saw you, and if anyone asks, the power failure was caused by equipment malfunction. Isabella spent the next hour studying the warehouse layout through Ruiz's security cameras, memorizing guard positions, patrol patterns, and the specific location where Alexander was being held. The kidnappers were professional but predictable, following security protocols that made sense for protecting against law enforcement raids, but might not account for a single individual attempting infiltration. At exactly midnight, she placed a call to Margaret Blackwood using a secure satellite phone that Carlos had provided. The connection was encrypted and routed through multiple international relay stations, making it virtually impossible to trace or intercept. "Isabella?" Margaret's voice was tight with anxiety and exhaustion. "Please tell me you have good news." "I've found Alexander. He's alive and appears to be unharmed. I'm going to attempt extraction in approximately 1 hour. Margaret's relief was audible, even through the electronic distortion. "Thank God! What do you need? Marcus has a tactical team standing by in San Diego. They can be there in 3 hours. "No," Isabella said firmly. "Mrs. Blackwood, I need you to trust me completely on this. Any military or law enforcement presence will get your son killed. These people are professionals, and they're expecting that kind of response. They're not expecting a middle-aged housekeeper who knows how to move through their world without being noticed. Isabella, you can't do this alone. These are dangerous people with military-grade weapons." "I know exactly what these people are," Isabella replied, her voice carrying an edge that Margaret had never heard before. "I used to be one of them. Not a kidnapper, but someone who operated in their world, who understood their rules, who survived by being smarter and more invisible than everyone else around me." The line was quiet for several seconds as Margaret processed this revelation. "What do you mean you used to be one of them?" Isabella took a deep breath, knowing that complete honesty was necessary if Margaret was going to trust her plan. The shipping company I worked for in Mexico City wasn't just moving legitimate cargo. We specialized in transporting things that couldn't go through normal channels: money, information, people who needed to disappear or reappear in different countries. I was good at it, because I looked harmless, because people underestimated me, because I could walk into dangerous situations and walk back out without anyone remembering I had been there. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because that life nearly killed me, Mrs. Blackwood. I came to the United States to escape it, to become invisible in a different way. Working for your family let me disappear into respectability, into a life where the most dangerous thing I faced was accidentally breaking expensive artwork while dusting." Margaret's voice was softer when she spoke again. "And now you're going back to that world to save my son." "I'm going back to that world because your son treated me like a human being when most people in his position would never notice I existed. Because you gave me a chance at a better life when I desperately needed it. Because sometimes the skills we try to leave behind are the ones we need most when everything else fails." Isabella could hear Margaret crying softly on the other end of the line. "Isabella, if something happens to you, I'll never forgive myself. If something happens to me, you make sure my daughter knows that her mother died trying to save someone who mattered. That's all I ask." The call ended, leaving Isabella alone with her thoughts and the weight of what she was about to attempt. She had spent 3 years convincing herself that her old life was behind her, that the skills and knowledge she had acquired in Mexico City's criminal underworld were part of a past she never wanted to revisit. But now those same skills might be the only thing standing between Alexander Blackwood and a death that would destroy the family that had given her a second chance at life. At exactly 1:30 a.m., the external lighting around Building 7 went dark as promised, plunging the warehouse complex into the kind of darkness that Isabella had learned to navigate during her years in the shipping business. She moved through the shadows with practiced silence, her worn boots making no sound on the concrete as she approached the target building. The first challenge was bypassing the electronic security system without triggering alarms that would alert the kidnappers to her presence. Isabella had learned to defeat such systems during her previous career, when clients often needed to access facilities without leaving digital footprints. The techniques required patience and precise timing, but they were well within her capabilities. She worked steadily for 10 minutes, using tools that Carlos had provided to create a temporary loop in the surveillance cameras and disable the motion sensors around the building's rear entrance. The work was delicate, requiring her to think like the criminals who had installed the security measures while anticipating the mistakes they might have made in their overconfidence. By the time the external lighting returned, Isabella was inside the warehouse, moving through storage areas filled with legitimate electronics imports that provided perfect cover for her approach to the main holding area. She could hear voices speaking Spanish in the distance, casual conversation that suggested the guards were relaxed and unprepared for any kind of infiltration attempt. The warehouse was laid out exactly as Ruiz's camera feeds had indicated, with the main storage area occupying most of the ground floor and office space accessible via a metal staircase along the eastern wall. Alexander was being held in a ground floor office that had been converted into a makeshift cell, its windows covered with plywood and its door reinforced with additional locks. Isabella positioned herself in the shadows near the office, studying the guard rotation patterns and waiting for the optimal moment to make contact with Alexander. The kidnappers were maintaining professional security protocols, with one guard stationed near the office door while others patrolled the perimeter and monitored communications equipment. At 2:15 a.m., the guard rotation created a brief window when the immediate area around Alexander's holding cell was unobserved. Isabella moved quickly but silently, slipping across the open space and positioning herself against the office wall where she could communicate with Alexander without being seen by returning guards. "Alexander," she whispered in English, her voice barely audible. "Alexander Blackwood." She heard movement from inside the office, followed by Alexander's voice speaking softly near the door. "Who's there? Are you with them?" "I work for your mother. My name is Isabella Santos. I'm here to get you out." There was a moment of stunned silence before Alexander responded. Isabella? The housekeeper? How did you... What are you doing here? Learning that housekeepers sometimes have more useful skills than people realize. Listen carefully, because we don't have much time. In exactly 30 minutes, there's going to be a distraction that will draw most of the guards away from this area. When that happens, I'm going to unlock this door, and we're going to walk out of here together. Walk out? Isabella, there are 6 armed men in this building. They're not going to just let us leave. Isabella smiled in the darkness, feeling the familiar surge of confidence that had once made her one of the most effective operatives in Mexico City's underground economy. Alexander, they're not going to see us leave. That's the difference between running and escaping. She spent the next 20 minutes explaining the escape route she had planned, using her knowledge of the warehouse layout and the kidnappers' security protocols to identify blind spots and weaknesses in their coverage. Alexander listened intently, asking intelligent questions that confirmed his survival training had prepared him better than most civilians for exactly this kind of situation. At precisely 2:45 a.m., a series of controlled explosions erupted in the industrial district's electrical substation, plunging a 6-block area into complete darkness. The explosions had been carefully planned by Carlos and his associates to appear accidental, while creating exactly the kind of emergency that would force the kidnappers to divide their attention between securing their prisoner and investigating potential threats to their operation. As expected, 4 of the 6 guards immediately moved to investigate the source of the explosions and assess whether the power failure represented a threat to their security. The remaining 2 guards maintained positions near the communications equipment and the main entrance, but their attention was focused outward, rather than on the makeshift cell where Alexander was being held. Isabella used the confusion to approach the office door, employing lock-picking skills that she had hoped never to use again. The locks were substantial but not sophisticated, designed to prevent casual interference rather than professional infiltration. Within 3 minutes, she had the door open and was face-to-face with Alexander Blackwood for the first time since beginning her rescue operation. Alexander looked tired and stressed, but otherwise unharmed, his expensive clothes rumpled, but his eyes alert and focused. He embraced Isabella briefly, a gesture of gratitude that carried the weight of genuine emotion. "Are you ready?" she whispered. "I've been ready since they grabbed me in Bogotá," Alexander replied. "Let's go home." The escape route Isabella had planned took advantage of the warehouse's legitimate business purpose, leading through storage areas and shipping corridors that would allow them to reach the rear exit without crossing the main floor, where guards might observe their movement. She moved with the confidence of someone who had navigated similar situations before, while Alexander followed her lead with the discipline of his security training. They were halfway to the exit when the lights came back on, ending the power failure sooner than Isabella had anticipated. The change in lighting conditions forced them to take shelter behind a stack of electronic shipments, while guard positions were re-established, and the kidnapping team assessed their security status. From their hiding position, Isabella could hear the guards communicating in rapid Spanish, their voices tense, as they tried to determine whether the power failure had been accidental or represented some kind of coordinated attack on their operation. The guard who had been watching Alexander's cell was reporting that the prisoner was secure, apparently unaware that the office was now empty. "They're going to discover you're missing within the next few minutes," Isabella whispered to Alexander. "When that happens, this entire building is going to become a war zone. We need to be gone before that discovery is made." She led him through the final section of the escape route, moving from cover to cover until they reached the rear exit of the warehouse. The door was equipped with an alarm system, but Isabella had disabled it during her initial infiltration. They stepped into the cool night air of the industrial district, free for the first time since the rescue operation began. But freedom was relative. The warehouse district was still controlled territory, and the kidnappers would begin an intensive search as soon as they realized their prisoner was missing. Isabella and Alexander needed to reach safety before the cartel's resources could be mobilized to recapture them. The extraction vehicle was waiting exactly where Carlos had promised, a nondescript delivery truck that would blend seamlessly into the industrial district's normal traffic. The driver was one of Carlos's most trusted associates, a man whose livelihood depended on moving people and cargo across borders without attracting official attention. As they climbed into the truck's cargo area, Isabella felt the tension of the past several hours beginning to release. They had successfully extracted Alexander from cartel custody without violence, without alerting law enforcement, and without creating the kind of international incident that might have endangered other potential kidnapping victims in the future. The drive to the airport took 45 minutes through Tijuana's back streets, avoiding main roads where police checkpoints might delay their departure. Alexander used the time to call his mother on Isabella's satellite phone, his voice breaking with emotion, as he assured Margaret that he was safe and would be home within hours. "Mom, Isabella saved my life," he said, looking directly at the housekeeper who had risked everything to rescue him. "She walked into a cartel stronghold alone and got me out without firing a shot. I don't know how she did it, but she's the reason I'm talking to you right now." Margaret's response was inaudible to Isabella, but Alexander's expression suggested his mother was crying with relief and gratitude. When the call ended, Alexander turned to Isabella with a serious expression. "I need to know something," he said. "This isn't the first time you've done something like this, is it?" Isabella considered how much to reveal about her past, weighing the need for honesty against her desire to leave certain chapters of her life permanently closed. "Let's just say that cleaning houses wasn't my first career, and some skills stay with you even when you try to forget them. Why did you leave that world?" Her expression grew distant as she remembered the circumstances that had driven her from Mexico to the United States 3 years earlier. Because in that world, being useful to dangerous people eventually means becoming dangerous to the wrong people. "I had a choice between disappearing permanently or disappearing into a new life. I chose the new life." "And now?" Isabella smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Now I'm thinking that maybe there's a way to use old skills for better purposes. Maybe being invisible doesn't have to mean being powerless." The Gulfstream was waiting on the private aviation tarmac, its engines already running for immediate departure. Margaret Blackwood stood at the bottom of the aircraft stairs, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son and the housekeeper who had saved him emerge from the extraction vehicle. The reunion between mother and son was intensely emotional, 3 days of terror and uncertainty dissolving into relief and gratitude. But Margaret's attention was equally focused on Isabella, the quiet woman who had risked her life to preserve the most important thing in Margaret's world. "I don't know how to thank you," Margaret said, embracing Isabella with genuine warmth. "I don't know how to repay what you've done for our family." Isabella pulled back slightly, her expression serious but gentle. "Mrs. Blackwood, you gave me a job when I needed one, a safe place to build a new life, a chance to be invisible in the best possible way. That was repayment enough for anything I could ever do for you." But even as she spoke the words, Isabella knew that her relationship with the Blackwood family had fundamentally changed. The invisible housekeeper who had cleaned their home for 3 years had revealed capabilities and knowledge that opened entirely new possibilities for her future. As the Gulfstream lifted off from Tijuana International Airport, carrying them back to California and safety, Margaret and Alexander began discussing how Isabella's unique skills might be employed in service of Blackwood Industries' international operations. The company's expansion into emerging markets often required navigation of complex cultural and political landscapes, exactly the kind of challenges that demanded Isabella's combination of linguistic ability, cultural knowledge, and street-smart survival instincts. 6 months later, Isabella Santos walked into the same Beverly Hills conference room where she had once encountered Margaret and Alexander during a routine cleaning shift. Now she wore a tailored business suit, carried a company tablet loaded with intelligence reports from 3 different continents, and commanded the attention of Blackwood Industries' entire executive team. Her official title was Director of International Cultural Relations, a position that Margaret had created specifically to utilize Isabella's unique qualifications. Her responsibilities included preparing cultural briefings for overseas negotiations, establishing relationships with local partners in emerging markets, and occasionally handling delicate situations that required someone who could operate effectively in the gray areas between legitimate business and the more complex realities of international commerce. The apartment in Queens had been replaced by a comfortable home in Pasadena, close enough to company headquarters for convenience, but far enough from Beverly Hills to maintain the privacy and normalcy that Isabella valued. Her daughter was now attending private school with full tuition support from Blackwood Industries, and Isabella's sister had completed her degree with company assistance and was working as a translator for an international law firm. The preliminary agreements with the Colombian Mining Consortium are ready for final review, Isabella reported to the assembled executives, her confidence and authority a dramatic contrast to the tentative housekeeper who had once apologized for interrupting meetings. I've established relationships with local government officials and community leaders who can smooth the regulatory approval process. She paused, looking directly at Margaret and Alexander. More importantly, I've identified potential security risks and cultural sensitivities that could complicate operations if not addressed proactively. The lessons learned from our previous international experiences have been invaluable in preparing for this expansion. Margaret nodded approvingly. Isabella's insights had already proven crucial in several major international deals, helping Blackwood Industries avoid the cultural missteps and security problems that often plagued American companies operating in unfamiliar territories. Her ability to build trust with local partners and navigate complex political situations had become one of the company's most valuable competitive advantages. After the meeting ended, Isabella remained in the conference room with Margaret and Alexander, reviewing final details for an upcoming trip to establish manufacturing partnerships in Southeast Asia. The work was challenging and sometimes dangerous, but it represented exactly the kind of purposeful application of her skills that Isabella had never imagined possible during her years of cleaning offices and trying to remain invisible. "You know," Alexander said, studying the intelligence reports that Isabella had prepared, "I still can't believe that 3 years ago you were cleaning this same conference room, and none of us had any idea what you were capable of." Isabella smiled, remembering the quiet woman who had pushed a cleaning cart through these same halls, invisible to the powerful people whose lives she was secretly equipped to save. Sometimes the most important thing about people isn't what you can see on the surface. Sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones that hide in plain sight. Margaret looked up from her own reports. "Isabella, do you ever regret leaving your old life behind? Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you had stayed in that world?" Isabella considered the question carefully, thinking about the dangerous but lucrative career she had abandoned in Mexico City, the skills and connections that had remained dormant during her years as a housekeeper, the choice between visibility and safety that had shaped every decision she had made since arriving in the United States. "I regret nothing," she said finally. "The old life taught me survival. This life taught me purpose. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're really worth." She gathered her reports and stood to leave, but paused at the conference room door to look back at the family that had unknowingly given her a second chance at both safety and significance. "Besides," she added with a slight smile, "being invisible was never about being powerless. It was about choosing when to be seen." As Isabella left the conference room, Margaret and Alexander remained behind, still processing the transformation they had witnessed. The quiet housekeeper, who had once been part of the mansion's invisible workforce, had become one of the most important members of their corporate team. Her journey from domestic employee to international business executive, a testament to the potential that exists in every person, regardless of their circumstances or social position. The kidnapping crisis had revealed not just Isabella's hidden capabilities, but also the Blackwood family's capacity for recognizing and nurturing talent that might otherwise remain forever unnoticed. In saving Alexander's life, Isabella had ultimately saved her own, transforming from someone who survived by remaining unseen into someone whose visibility served a purpose greater than mere survival. Margaret reflected on how many other talented individuals might be hidden within the everyday workforce of domestic employees, service workers, and support staff who kept wealthy families functioning while remaining essentially invisible to their employers. Isabella's story suggested that potential existed everywhere, waiting for the right crisis or opportunity to reveal itself. The experience had changed all of them in fundamental ways. Margaret had learned to look beyond surface appearances and social positions when evaluating people's capabilities. Alexander had gained a deeper appreciation for the complex lives and hidden talents of people he had previously taken for granted. And Isabella had discovered that her past experiences, rather than being shameful secrets to hide, could become valuable assets when applied to worthy purposes. In the months that followed, Blackwood Industries quietly implemented new policies designed to identify and develop talent among employees at every level of the organization. Isabella personally oversaw programs that provided educational opportunities, career development resources, and pathways for advancement that recognized diverse backgrounds and unconventional qualifications. The initiative became a model for other corporations, demonstrating that recognizing hidden potential wasn't just morally right but also practically valuable. Companies that limited themselves to traditional hiring practices and conventional career paths were missing opportunities to access talent that could provide significant competitive advantages. Isabella's office, located in the executive wing of Blackwood Industries headquarters, became a symbol of possibility for employees throughout the organization. Her journey from housekeeper to executive proved that talent could emerge from anywhere, and that the most important qualifications couldn't always be measured by formal education or previous job titles. The story of Alexander's kidnapping and rescue remained confidential, known only to the family and a few trusted security personnel. But the larger story of Isabella's transformation became an inspiration within the company, encouraging other employees to reveal their own hidden capabilities and pursue opportunities that might have seemed impossible under traditional corporate hierarchies. As Isabella settled into her new role, she never forgot the lessons learned during her years of invisibility. The skills that had kept her alive in Mexico City's criminal underworld, the cultural knowledge that had enabled her to navigate dangerous situations, and the ability to remain unnoticed when necessary, all continued to serve her in the legitimate business world. But perhaps most importantly, she had learned that true power came not from being invisible, but from choosing when and how to be seen. In saving Alexander Blackwood, she had ultimately saved herself, transforming a life of survival into a life of purpose, and proving that potential exists everywhere, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.